Welcome to the table, everyone. Kind of leading up to the June 6th anniversary D-Day. I will be playing Sergeant's D-Day tomorrow, specifically the board game, not the Sergeant's Miniatures game. But I was looking at the games I have, and I have not played the Band of Brothers series of games, Screaming Eagles, in a couple of years. I got the remastered Kickstarter, maybe it was 2 years ago, I don't even remember exactly. And I absolutely really enjoy the game. I'm not a fan of the armored combat in the game, but I really liked the infantry combat in the game. So I was, really torn between dusting this off. I also want to get back into fighting formations. I want to get back to Storms of Steel I got right next to. I just wish I had more time and more life to just play games. Of course, to make that happen would mean I'd have to quit the day job I have, and yeah, the wife wouldn't be too happy about that. I don't think I'd be too happy about that, because then we wouldn't have a mortgage payment and whatnot. We'd have other problems to worry about. But I thought, let me just whip this out. And I'm not really playing anything right now because I have completely forgotten how to play. That happens. So why am I recording this? Well, I thought it would be just a fun, I'll put this under the vlog category. My son hates when I do the quotes. I'm going to put this as a vlog, just chit-chatting about stuff. So I wanted to get this one out, and as I was pulling this out, I was reminded of some of the reasons why I liked it. One, I do like the compactness of it. This is 2 boards. Takes up not a lot of gaming space, but yet I have a lot of maneuver room. It might not look like much maneuver room because the Americans are just going to sweep through the town, but there is some maneuvering here. It's okay. Plus, they're mounted. Well, not mounted, but these are like thick card something. They're cardboard. But you have a nice, sturdy geomorphic, what do they call that? The geomorphic maps. You can rearrange them. I love the artwork. I know that for some people, the artwork looks a little cartoony, like a comic book. I absolutely love the artwork for Band of Brothers. I've always thoroughly enjoyed the artwork and just thought it was amazing. And I think the infantry counters look good. I mean, people could really argue on the artwork for the counters, but I think they do a very good job. They're very nice. And there is a lot of information, though. I will give you that. The counters do have a lot of info, but it's really not that bad. If you've not seen this game before, let me grab my pencil here. If you've never seen the game before, and as I'm relearning the game, reteaching myself, some things have come back to me. So I'm going to move this. Let's just look at a sample German counter. One of the problems that happened in a Kickstarter, they did a Kickstarter reprint. In the reprint there was like Ghost Division, there was the Texas Arrows, I think that's what it was called, I'm looking at it right now. Yeah, Texas Arrows, and they had the Screaming Eagles. There was some slight coloration differences between like German units. Some of the German counters kind of were purplish. It wasn't intentional, but they were trying to get this consistent gray among everything. So I actually have some purplish looking German units and things, and that didn't bother me at all. Why did I mention that? I have no idea. It just came to my mind here as I was zooming in. Okay, so the counters, a lot of information, but it kind of breaks down kind of nice. Over here we have morale values. So 10 is the high value morale. And you know what? The game comes with 10-sided dice. And I have misplaced my little baggie of 10-sided dice. So I wonder if I have some 10-sided dice here. That's actually very important because it is a die 10. I think there might be some situations you could use, die 6 to, here's one. You could use like some die 6 or something to help determine things, but the game from my memory is primarily die 10. And when you want to go to do something, you have to basically roll a die 10, and if you equal that morale value or lower, the unit gets to act. Okay, so you might say, Eddie, if it's a 10, you don't have to roll. Well, you're right. You don't have to roll if it's a 10 because the highest number you're going to get on your 10-sided die is a 10. So if they have a morale of 10 starting out, they're never going to fail the want to activate. Like, they're going to do stuff. Now, if they take a little bit of damage, like let's say you shoot at them, they might get a suppressed. I remember that. And then, as you got the little suppression, this was something I loved about the game. I loved the miss-sized counters. I thought it was brilliant. You got these little counters, they're a little bit smaller. They sit up in the corner, and you can read all the combat values. How clever is that? I was like dumbfounded when I play a lot of other games, and they don't do that. All the counters are one size. So when you stack the different damage states or whatever the game uses, you got to constantly lift counters off to see what's underneath. But that was one thing I always thought was really clever about this design. So simple. Just make the counter a little smaller, and now I can see all the combat values. And now if I'm suppressed and I have a yellow 5 and I'm going to activate that unit, I can take my die 10, roll, and if I get that number or lower, they're free to activate. And I remember reading in comments, there are, people would say, not everyone, okay, so I'm just speaking from the few comments I've read, that leads to a game of too much dice rolling, because you're always rolling for, morale to see if they can do something. And I don't remember the game ever feeling like that. And I think the reason why is because one of the things of the game, and this is something I've actually been discussing with myself quite a bit, is what is a good activation system for games? Let's talk about that. You might say, what's the focus of this video? There is no focus. It's just me randomly talking thoughts, okay? When you play a game like Bolt Action, and I don't have the dice with me, Bolt Action uses a system of multicolored dice. Like, for example, they're like 6-sided dice, and you might say the red pig is Russians, and the green is the Americans. It's a pig too. And on that dice, it has the actions you can do, like advance or run or fire or whatever. And there is one dice in the bag for each of your units. So there might be, a dice in the bag for your machine gun team. There's a dice in the bag for your squad. So you might have 5 or 6 dice per side in a bag. You shake it up and you randomly pull out, a die. And you go, oh, one of the American units go. And then you can assign any American unit that you want to do something. And, okay, that's fine. That's clever. But here's what I didn't like about that system. In my mind, I'm thinking that there should be some sort of coordination on a battlefield between units that are trying to work in tandem with each other. So the extreme opposite of completely blind random activation of units would be something like maybe Flames of War, which is maybe you might call the more traditional, one side moves all of its soldiers and then does all of its firing, and it does everything for its side. And then the other side turns around and does the same thing. They move everything fires, and yes, you're coordinating units, but that leads to an instance where you have one side, maybe they get bored because they're waiting on you to move and fire and do everything, and you're sitting there going, when do I get a turn? So Bolt Action kind of alleviated that by the fact that, it's random and you might get 2 or 3 units in a row, and then your opponent might get 2 or 3 units in a row, but it's all random, or it alternates. So here's what I like with this, the Band of Brothers. It's almost an in-betweener almost. You're going to have an operations range. See if I can get it on the book. There's an operations range. It says 2 to 5. Now, you're going to alternate turns, and when it's your turn, you get to activate a number of units within that operations band. So, for example, here, let's say this guy is all good. I just went from talking about the numbers on the counter to talking about activation. Oh, because that ties into morale. Okay, there was a thought to this. There's a way. So here you are. You might be rolling your dice to determine if you can do that. But here's the thing. Since you don't have to activate every single soldier at once, if they were all suppressed in some capacity, you don't have to roll. Like I got 7 people here. This is 7 German units. I don't have to roll a die 10 for every single wounded unit that wants to do something, because my command range is going to limit how many of these people I can activate. And since my command range is only 2 to 6 units, depending on what my opponent is doing, I can move all of these non-wounded people. No problem. We're going to move them and do stuff with them, and we're fine. No problem at all. And I just mark a used on them when I'm done, and we're good. But when it comes to these folks, I only have 2. So I'm going to make my roll twice for them. And then they can or cannot. So I rolled a 1 for this guy, so he'd be able to do something even though he's suppressed. Rolled a 9 for him, and no, he's done. I'll just put the used. So he'd be used. And I don't find the dice rolling for morale on the different states of the units to be all that bad, actually. It's not that bad, because you're not ever fully having to roll for like 20 people all the time. It's just a handful of people here and there. So the morale mechanic, I thought, was pretty good. And it also reminds me a little bit of Bolt Action, because in Bolt Action, the miniatures game, you can shoot at a unit like a squad. You can hit into the squad area. That's like called scoring a hit on the squad, and then you roll to see if you do damage. And if you don't do any damage whatsoever, like all the soldiers come out unscathed, they're going to get some suppression. That's kind of similar to this. You can suppress units without actually damaging units. So I love that mechanic. I love that morale mechanic. And they can, again, if they get hit a second time but take no physical casualties, they'll become fully suppressed, and now they'll activate on a 1. So that's the morale tracker. Really, really kind of cool mechanic. I like it a lot. And I never found it very tedious to use. Plus, throughout the turn, as turn segments go by, the suppression starts to wear off. So as the squad collects themselves and their NCOs are screaming at them, and that's something else I like too. The NCOs and your leaders are built into your squads. Your squads have leaders, and if the sergeant goes down, the corporal takes over. They have the senior NCO, if you will, and the junior NCOs. So I like that. It's very nice. So there's your morale. Then note down here, if I remember right, that's shooting values, firepower, and this first number is like your standard firepower value. I'm trying to go off memory because I'm trying to relearn the game. It's your firepower. And this is what you're going to use, like if you're stationary, it's just like a standard firepower, or within like the range of your shooting. And they can shoot out to 6. That's this middle number. So anything in this blast is like their firepower. And what's cool is, with the first edition rules, they had some rules in place that you had to do a little mental math where, or it was just figured out differently, but you had a different firing value for if you did things like opportunity fire, assault fire, and things like that. There was some little bit of math that you would do to calculate your new firepower value based on those situations. And in the remastered edition, they kind of did the math for you a little bit, and that second number is slightly different, but it's like really similar. So that's what this second number is for. This is for the number you would use for determining things like your final, they call it like your proficiency score. So here's like your regular score when everything is going good. Here's like your proficiency score when you're doing not optimal firing situations. There's still some penalties and modifiers to your firepower for like cover and other things that a infantry unit might have to deal with. But I thought that's kind of neat. You got your 2 values. One there that you can look at and go, yep, here's what I'm using for standard firing. Oh, I'm doing something unusual like final opportunity fire. Well, there's my score. I just look at that and I'm good. So you got your 2 firepower values there. Not too shabby. And then this is the range. So I can shoot out to 6. Now, if I remember right, if I shoot beyond 6 out to double, so if I was shooting up to like at range 7 through 12, I'd be using that secondary firepower number to try and hit. That's not very accurate. I gotta roll one. I'm not gonna hit too many things that often. So there's your range. And then here is casualty results. Now I had to admit, this is the one I'm going to have to definitely look for. But this has to deal with, are you just suppressed? Are you fully suppressed? Or like, did you take casualties, kind of a thing. And that I don't remember exactly off the top of my head how that works. Okay, that will come later. I know some people will hop into the comments and explain that, and that's totally fine because you might not see the second video after I've reread the rules and play the game to kind of explain some of that. So if you want to explain that here in the comments for future audiences that may miss future gameplay, that's totally cool with me. But this is basically your the value that determines how much damage you'll take, sustain, when you're being fired at. So this is, again, a dice roll to determine that. And then finally, some of the counters have special anti-tank weapons, and they will have a value up here. And I'll have to reread, but I've trying to keep up with the rules and changes from first edition to, because again, it's been like 2 years since I've pulled this out of the box to really look at. I say 2 years, but I don't exactly remember how long ago it was. But this is basically your anti-tank weapon. Not every unit comes with anti-tank stuff, so I do remember I just read in the book it says the lower number the value. So how that works out will be a minute before I figure it out, because this particular scenario doesn't have anti-tank weapons, and I don't remember if you can use their anti-tank weapons against infantry or if that is just for anti-armor. So we'll find out if I can use that against the attacking Americans. So it's nice if I just grab one of these here paratroopers, and there are different unit types that you can get. So the game, over the 3 different volumes you have, the Texas Arrows, the Ghost, it's not called Ghost Division, but Ghost Panzer, and then the Screaming Eagles originally, they actually have different troop quality types. So it's not just all, this is the standard German. There's several different German types that you can get with different values. And this is an example, I think, of the American Airborne. They have a little bit, well, if you look, overall they have much higher combat value. They have a slightly shorter range, probably because they also brought some short-ranged carbine weapons because they're airborne, so they couldn't carry a whole bunch of long. They got some smaller, compact weapons, so the range is a little shorter. And they are a little more resilient than their not as elite German counterpart here. That's also reflected in their morale. So as I take their first suppression, they go down to a 6, and fully suppressed, they're a 2. A little bit better odds of doing things, but fully suppressed means that there's a lot of bullets pinning you down. But the American units in this scenario are a little bit better. Tanks will come much, much later. I'll be honest, when I was playing the game and I remembered how to play, I never played with the tanks because I was not a fan of the armor rules. And if you were to ask me why, no one did, but you might be like, oh, why did you not like the armor? It's because at that particular time I was on a real kick with the detailed armor rules of games like Panzer 2nd Edition by GMT. And then I think also a couple of years ago I was into, still am, even Old School Tactical had slightly more detailed armor rules. And so I never gave these armor rules a chance because I just said, well, it's just too simple. Compare this to that, roll a die, boom, it blows up, it's dead. I at the time was really into, I want to know penetration at this range, armor at this range, this angle, how much deflection is there, what's the humidity in the air. It really felt like you had to check a lot of stuff. Did the gunner have a full stomach? Was he hungry? Was he upset about the Dear John letter he had? There was, an unimaginable amount of detail that I was really happy to look at. Now, however, I'm coming back to this going, you know what though? I think I want to give their armor rules a chance because the Ghost Panzer, being on the east front, has lots of armor to it. There's some armor here as well, but this really mostly focuses on a lot of the infantry tactics. So they'll bring up some tanks as reinforcements, but this is a lot of infantry stuff. Yeah, you get on to like scenario 11, and there's some looks like a Panther and a Tiger being used. So definitely want to read up, especially if I want to do the Russian front. Okay, so that's some of the values there on your counter. Here's a weapon team. Again, it's got their value. It's got their, how if they'll take damage. There's their firepower value. There's a 2. They have a subscript of 2 because if they get into hand-to-hand combat, they'll have a firepower of 2. So there's a little subscript for that. Otherwise, if they're wounded, let's look at the wounded sides now. Otherwise, if they're wounded, machine gun teams or any weapon with a little subscript number, that would be their wounded side melee combat value. And then their combat values can reduce appropriately. They didn't reduce that much. It just 8-7 versus 7-5. It reduced a little bit for this weapon team. The German infantry still stay at 4-1. The morale value, now you'll see the morale value has changed. Okay, so go back to that rolling dice to activate. I could see, theoretically, if you had a whole bunch of wounded people, you might think it's a little unfair that you have to roll dice to see if they activate. I still think it's a good mechanic. I think, and I'm just guessing, that maybe why some people don't like that is because they like having complete control over their people. And I thought it was a really neat, clever game mechanic that these people, if they're wounded, especially if they're suppressed and wounded, they might not want to go forward. Now, what that reminds me of, just again, random thought, is that computer game Close Combat. I remember years ago when Close Combat by Microsoft came out, the very first one. That was crazy because they built in essentially an AI system just like this to all your units. So if a unit was suppressed and maybe damaged, they had different mechanics. You didn't see any of the math, but you might order a unit to do something and they'd be like, no. Or you could see when they would get scared and break and the little pixel guy would run away. It does remind me of that a little bit. Your people are not always going to suicidally want to go and do what you tell them to do. They might say, oh, I'm suppressed and I'm wounded and you want me to go and charge this weapon team? Oh, rolled an 8. Not today. That makes sense to me, right? They're going to say, nope, I'm pooping out on you. We're shot up. Cannot do. So I still think that's a great mechanic. And that's the game in a nutshell, right? Not only do you have your activation, so I could do like, this is command range of 2 to 5. So I could activate 2 people. Now, one thing with the activating of units, you can just put them on an op fire. And then if people move within range later, because that's the thing, it says you have to activate the minimum number up to the maximum. So if my command range is 2 to 5, I have to activate 2 of these folks. And that means I can either just put a used on them, like, okay, I guess you're going to just sit there and wait for the Americans to come. Or I could say, well, you're going to go on op fire and wait for the Americans to come. You're not going to get to do anything else later, but you are prepared to receive incoming visitors, people who will walk to you. So that is one thing. You have to activate the minimum number. But that still allows for some back and forth interaction. The, German player in this example has op fire. He's activated his 2. Then the American player, I zoomed in, so I'm just going to shift over. So now let's just say you do have, the American players here. And that operation range is for both. So they might move somebody through the hedge. They might move this guy through the hedge. But they might say to themselves, you know what, let's move a couple more. And that was a point, going back to the bolt action, why I like this a little bit better than just purely random, is the fact that since it's a range of units I can activate, I can try to coordinate some movement. So I have no problem with the game telling me I cannot activate every single unit in a turn, but I do appreciate that they say you can potentially activate 3, 4, or 5 people in a turn where you can coordinate, because I might, and it can be any ones I want, so I might say, well, let me activate this guy, and I'm going to activate this guy, and then I have down here, I'm going to move this guy, because we're going to start setting up a flanking operation. I'm totally cool with that. I love that. I think that's great. That's why I was saying that's like a great compromise between, say, like Flames of War or Bolt Action, where it's you move everything while my opponent over here is bored and starts looking at their phone. In an alternating system like this, even where it's like 2 or 3, that still keeps your opponent looking at the board, because he may have, or she, they may have set up all their opportunity fire units, right? So now they're just waiting for you to move in where they can activate opportunity fire. So I think just the very, very, very bare basic bones of the game are fantastic. Absolutely love them. Again, minus the tank combat, because I haven't played tank combat yet. I may be, in my mind, oversimplifying the tank combat, but I just remember at the time it was beneath me. But I thought these were some of the best infantry combat rules I had ever played with. So what's the scenario I'm going to use to try and relearn the game? I did make a mistake. I was going to be doing scenario number 3, easy peasy. Let me bring the book over here. I tell you, my mind, I get lost in my own thoughts sometimes. At first, I remember reading on, I think, a Board Game Geek forum post, and some folks had said, well, you know, scenario 1 and scenario 2 of Screaming Eagles just seem so dry, very boring. And I remember, I think John, the designer is John. Yeah, oh, Jim. Find the title there. Come here. Jim, not John, Jim. And I think Jim had written a post or responded in a post saying, yeah, 1 and 2 are more of the, like, the training, get the basics of the game down, and then scenario 3 on are pretty good. So if you want something a little bit better experience than scenario 1 and 2, I could be wrong now. It could be, that's just what I remember. But I thought Jim said scenario 3 onward are much, much better. They include a lot more things for you to play with. The first couple scenarios are really just that, to kind of get you into it. For example, here in the remastered edition, maybe that was before the remastered edition where I read that, but the remastered edition is just a handful of units on one little map to cross a bridge. And then scenario 1, Day of Days, again, one map, 6 units total for the Americans, just 4 for the German with some decoys. Yeah, so I thought to myself, I will start with scenario 3. But as I was grabbing all the counters, I grabbed everything in the map setup for 2. So my brain just totally went to the fact that I'm going to do scenario 2. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do scenario 2, So Few Led by So Many. It's 2 maps, still just a handful of units. I'll have 6 full-strength American airborne, 2 half-strength Americans, or the wounded ones, and a weapon team, and then 7 German units. And I'm not bringing decoys because I'm playing solo. I will admit, that is one thing I don't know if I ever quite figured out how I wanted to handle, or at least in solo play, is the hidden units. From what I remember playing around with my son, if I ever get my son to play, he's my buddy, the decoys seem pretty good in face-to-face type of games. Decoys in a solitaire, I don't think I ever found a real good way to implement them into the game. Now, essentially, a decoy unit, I don't have one with me. Yeah, they're all back in the German bag. But essentially, it it's a counter, right, that will fit over a counter, and or you can, excuse me, you like can run it by itself, but then you know it's fake. But maybe you can stack 2 decoys so you don't know for sure. But basically, the decoy just acts as a unit that moves around the board. You can shoot at it. You can see that it's coming. But the idea is to keep you guessing as to where German forces actually are. So as a solo player, I don't think I ever found a way to really implement the decoy counters as if I was playing with a face-to-face opponent. And so, some of you may have tips and ideas on how to make that work. That'd be great if you want to share them. Totally cool. But I think for the relearning game, when I actually film that video, no decoy units. We'll just have 7 German units that we have to sweep through the town and try to, it says, eliminate all the German defenders. Now, in this setup I'm showing you, I have all the squads spread out. You can actually stack up to 2 units in a hex, and that might be, maybe later more to my advantage to do that in some cases. But honestly, in all the games I played, I don't really remember anybody really stacking the units. So I'm not sure if there's an advantage to stacking, not stacking. But again, that might come back to me as I reread the rules and start playing. I'd say the only other thing that's obviously, since there's no vehicles, we're going to be just fine with the basics. But the idea with command points, just speaking of that, vehicles and I don't remember if it said weapon teams, but I do know for sure vehicles take 3 command points to activate, whereas these units will take 1 command point to activate. When I'm saying command point, I should say the operations range. So in this case here, this is operations range 2 through 5. If this had a couple of armor units, I can only activate 1 armor unit, because that's 3. And it says if activating another unit would take you over the operations range, you can't activate the other unit. So it's a good thing I don't have any vehicles to try and remember that particular rule. The only other rule that I'm going to have to try and remember for myself is the instance of command points. And I'm using that term often when I'm trying to talk about the operations range. There is actually something called command points. Command points are things that you can spend to add influence over the battlefield, right? They are the abstract representation of supply and command. Some of the things you can do with your command points says you can re-roll any non-gun morale check die roll made, may be used by the player normally moving second to perform 1 action before the opponent goes. Also, you can conduct final opportunity fire. If it's further than 1 hex away, so if like someone's charging you and you've already activated, you can spend a command point to try and shoot at that person as they move in. Maybe used to reroll a melee, not a close assault combat roll made by a player. Maybe used to increase the proficient firepower by 1, but not greater than the normal firepower before 1 attack. So it just gives you a couple of little bonuses, and those points, they don't carry from turn to turn, so it's you either use them or not use them. But again, as a single player, I sometimes forget to use those because I'm not focused on that, because those are just little bonuses. But I'm going to try to remember to use the command points. But anyway, that's just kind of sharing some of my thoughts on the game as I'm ramping back up to play it. I'm hoping to get a few games in for this. I really want to like this game as much as I remember myself liking it. I don't know if that makes sense, but I have had games in the past where I've said to myself, boy, I love that game. That game's amazing. And I get it out to the table and I try playing it again and I'm like, this isn't very fun. I remember this being fun, so I want this to be fun. I love the look. I remember, like I said, the morale mechanics and little things like that that to me just really stuck out as fun, clever design. I can't wait to play again because I really want to like this as much as I remember liking it. And I will put up a gameplay of that. So just consider this a random thoughts on the game Band of Brothers in general. Not a review. Please don't take this as a review, because I think it would be unfair to call this a review. because I don't remember how to play it. I don't think that would be very fair to Jim and all his work. So stay tuned later for an actual playthrough of Scenario 2, So Few Led by So Many. Thanks again for tuning in. I appreciate all the comments that you all leave. I really appreciate all the new subscribers. I can't tell you how exciting that is to see our community growing. I do have a blog, and I haven't used it all that much. Why am I going to promote the blog right now? I've always wanted the idea of like a community of gamers, almost like the Board Game Geek of gaming, right? But something more dedicated to wargaming. Now, I'm not saying that's what I have or that I can run and manage that, but I really do like the idea of community of gamers where people can just come together and chit-chat about a game or something that they see in a YouTube video that they watched, or whether it's my video, someone else's video. So the blog, I'm just going to start uploading all the videos there as well, because I think, and I could be wrong, but I'm also hoping that the blog has maybe more robust communication tools, like people can leave comments and things. Yes, you can leave comments in YouTube. However, not everybody watches YouTube through their computer to where they can actually leave comments, but they might be able to on the blog. So I'm thinking what I'll do is in the descriptions of the videos, I'll include a link to the blog. So the blog doesn't have a whole lot more other than just me posting my videos, but I think what I might do is start posting photographs and things like that. And again, I just want to help create that community where people can just talk about war games or whatever game we're covering, miniatures game, whatever. I just want to have a nice little hangout. I know people have said also to me, just use Facebook. There's been several suggestions that people have given me, and I just don't know the best way about going about creating a community. On the flip side, maybe you know of a really good community and maybe I should just go hang out there, but I just like the idea that we have a place that we can chat. So I'll put the blog up there if anybody's interested in then leaving comments there on the blog for other people to go and read. But anyway, enough of that. I'll talk to you all later. Thanks for tuning in.